BlazBlue has always proven itself to be a solid fighting game. But what if you took its best characters, flashiest combos, and put it into a roguelike game? '91 Act gave me access to the alpha build, and I truly think this is something special. Fans of anime fighters may get the chance to try an action roguelike for the first time. Fans of Dead Cells, Hades, and more are getting introduced to BlazBlue. As a roguelike fan, I felt right at home with the flow and mechanics of Entropy Effect, which I'll call EE for the rest of the video. In today's age, the roguelite and roguelike genre is pretty jam-packed with different games. So it's actually exciting to see something crossing between the different boundaries of the genres. For this gameplay preview, I'm actually playing an alpha version of the game. When this releases into early access, some of the alpha elements that you're seeing in my preview may have changed by then. There is a hub world that contains most of the story elements. Then once the run begins, there's a character selection screen, very reminiscent to what you would expect to see from a fighting game. You choose your character, then you choose an Evotype to inherit to your character. This is a very interesting system that utilizes the runs that have lost or won, and we'll go more in depth with that later. Early in the run, the gameplay will be relatively simple, as you would expect from most roguelike games. You fight with basic attacks and a skill until all the monsters on the screen are dead, and you choose your next stage. This continues until the true gameplay systems begin to emerge, and that's where I'm really hooked into the game itself. Let me introduce you to Potential. This is the system where the BlazBlue fighting game and roguelike elements start to blend together. Potential grants you one enhancement to these, or a brand new attack for your kit. For example, Hibiki, another classic BlazBlue character, excels in assassin-style gameplay, but you can actually unlock Windbreaker, which throws shuriken across the ground. Down and basic attack is an input command. This is something that Hibiki did not have in his kit originally. Mai is typically played with a basic attack combo that creates tornadoes. However, I was able to take potentials that enhanced her dash attack in numerous ways. Himeyuri grants a jumping lunge out of her basic attack. Homecoming grants an invincible slash on the dash attack. When you take both of these together, Himeyuri is added to all of your dashes. On top of that, I picked up Crimson Snatch, which grants a new attack to my aerial dash attack. Combining that with Homecoming, the dash attack becomes invincible in the air. Finally, we picked up Suzuran, which adds a lunge finisher to my aerial dash. The synergy on Suzuran is that I can now do this on the ground. You can imagine my excitement towards the end of the game to see just how different the combat had become when compared to the beginning of the game. Watch how differently I play out these two boss encounters. Again, I want to stress that this is a pre-release build, but even in this early stage, Potential is one of my favorite features in Entropy Effect. It is, however, not the only roguelike system in the game. The next system I want to introduce to you is called Tactics. As a roguelite fan, Tactics is going to feel very familiar to you. It's the classic roguelike draft system. You have Electricity, Fire, Toxin, Light, Blade, Ice, and Umbra. Each of these grant different abilities, different benefits, and all synergize within each other. And trust me, there are a lot of enhancements to choose from. In different runs, I've seen things like spawn lightning balls that orbit around the character, enhance the size and the duration of the balls. I've had ice spikes that hurl themselves at enemies and inflict cold. If enemies are killed while cold, you increase your ice damage overall. I've even had weird tentacles that spawn whenever I press the crouch button. And even this could get enhanced by its size and attack speed. Really, the list goes on and helps you focus on the strengths and weaknesses of your potential. You can have tactics that focus on skill damage while your potential is mostly about your skill. You could have tactics that want high attack speed, so now I'm taking potential that gives me combos on my basic attack. While we've seen this draft system in roguelites before, I really enjoy the idea of finding synergies on the fly, where I'm matching the boon to the gameplay that my character can provide. With the time that I spent on the game, I pretty much grabbed every new tactic I could find. The game actually rewards you for picking things for the first time. Without really trying to min-max my tactics choices, I still found that picking the most useful tactics at the time still granted me pretty powerful benefit. So with all of the potentials and tactics to your disposal, this is still a roguelike game after all, so death is inevitable. Upon dying in a run or winning, you are rewarded with a grade and some meta currency for your efforts. This currency we'll get into a little bit later. The grade for your Evotype, which is the Blazblue character you're playing, is saved in a list of Evotype records. These records are used for two things. One is a challenge mode that puts the player up against a boss or various other enemies. You actually choose a previous Evo record and use that exact build to complete the challenge. What I found really exciting was that the grade of the record is your eligibility to start the challenge itself. That means you'll want to get high marks in your runs if you expect to take on the higher tier challenges. If you think about it, this is a pretty elegant solution to allow a player to relive some of the best builds that they've made, while keeping the tradition of roguelike permadeath in the game itself. The second use for the Evotype record is that whenever you start a new run, you can actually inherit some of the bonuses from a previous record. These are based on the record's score. Some traits aren't available until you reach that score. At base value, you get the skill of the character, but then any traits or special tactics that you may have gotten along the way, those are included based off of the score of the record. Because each Evotype has a unique passive, you end up with some really cool dynamic passives that actually benefit your current character. Let's take Noelle for example. Very fun looking long-range gunslinger character. This long-range damage passive works well on a character like Lambda. Hakumen is the opposite of that. Hakumen is a close-range fighter, so using the bonuses from Hibiki is a good idea because that focuses on you being behind the enemy. Throughout the early access development and of course further on, as the roster grows, I can imagine that mixing and matching your inheritance with different characters opens up a huge world of themed and specialized builds. At the current time, there are 7 playable characters. I'm going to try to pronounce these. My apologies if I butcher any of them. But starting from the top, there's Kokonoe, who is a scientist that fires rockets all over the battlefield. Hakumen, which is a legendary warrior with a really good parry attack. Mai Nasume, who fires tornadoes along with a bunch of spinning blades. Hibiki is an assassin that excels with double daggers and makes some really fun and flashy blade combos. Ragna, the premier character of Blazblue, drains his own HP to damage enemies. Noelle Vermillion, that gunslinger that I talked about earlier, who has more than just pistols, by the way. And finally, Lambda 11, who summons blades from portals and excels at juggling enemies. When I watched the trailer for Entropy Effect, it does show two other characters, one known as Taukaka and another who is Jin Kisaragi. You can see them fighting on the rooftops against Susano, who I think is like a classic villain in the game. What's really interesting is that we haven't really had a roguelike game that has direct ties to some other franchise. Typically, we see crossovers, and that's about it. The concept of releasing new characters from an established roster would drum up some real excitement between Blazblue characters who know these already, and roguelike players who just love updates and DLC for their game. I personally don't have any specific characters I'd like to see. However, if you're a Blazblue fan, feel free to drop your wish list of characters in the comments of this video. I do want to apologize to the Blazblue fans. I'm not someone who follows the franchise all that closely. I do understand that the story is pretty complicated, right? I'll go ahead and assume that it's not Kingdom Hearts level, as nothing can really be more convoluted than that. From what I've seen so far, there are vampires, humans that become robots, robots that become humans, humans that create beastkin, literal magic. In roguelike games, very few of these focus on any story outside of general world building. In some ways, the majority of top-selling action roguelikes have some semblance of story and strike a balance between how important that story is for the player's enjoyment or how much of it is purely for immersion. From the early build of Entropy Effect, it appears this is a mix between immersion and some important story pieces. Most, if not all, the story takes place in the hub world. The conversation between your character and the NPCs are mostly casual. I didn't feel the need to pull up the Blazblue wiki or any kind of YouTube explanations on Blazblue's history. In fact, there was a decent amount of comedy and perhaps I could say fourth wall breaking comments, which is probably a good thing to not have the player lost in Blazblue's lore. Now, speaking of roguelike games in general, I have a pretty extensive history with the action roguelike genre. I've seen many systems that have blown me away, and just as many that were terrible design choices. For the games I care about the most, I try to use my knowledge to report and advise as much as possible between both the community and the dev team if possible. Typically, this boils down to 4 major points. A, how good is the power fantasy in the game? B, how different is the game from one run to the next? C, how much grinding is required for a baseline enjoyment of the game? And D, how does the game scale to my hours I've spent it? I would like to think that aspect A is pretty well fleshed out right now. Character balance is probably gonna continue throughout early access period, but right now each character feels pretty viable to complete a run. I would say out of all the characters I played, I probably struggled with Hakumen the most, but that could also mean that I didn't really build him in a way that would win a run. From one run to the next, the stage layouts and bosses change frequently enough that I felt engaged just about all the time. There was really only one boss that I didn't particularly enjoy fighting, but that's simple feedback for a dev team. One thing I really enjoyed during the run is this dynamic room selection in between each stage. That helps to break up some of the monotony that most roguelikes face in between their bosses. Here, you can choose between a basic fight or a harder fight, but then sometimes you'll see shops, you'll see potentials, you'll see rest areas, and of course, Gamba, which you would expect from a roguelike, I think. These rest areas are actually required to get through the game based off of a very interesting mechanic known as entropy. Entropy is similar to malaise if you've ever played Dead Cells before, where you are passively increasing the difficulty of the current run, and the player will need to mitigate this or else face some pretty grueling consequences. What makes this interesting is that the entropy is on a risk-reward system. The game will actually show you that there's a potential detriment incoming before it actually happens. You can decide whether you want to reduce your entropy now to prevent or delete a previous effect, or you can push on and possibly get some bonus rewards. I found detriments such as enemies explode or they spawn lightning, and sometimes I decide to just play around these. However, when I found things like enemies heal themselves or enemies are shielded, I then have to decide, do I want to keep pushing or have I reached my limit? Your power limits are typically dependent on the choices you've made throughout the run. However, there is of course meta progression. That's what we call scaling up your character's profile in some menu in the hub world of whatever game you're playing. Yes, there is roguelite meta progression in Entropy Effect. This is in the form of what they call mind upgrades. As I said, most modern roguelites have this in some form, and some games have it worse than others. As of right now, Entropy Effect's version does not have the boring upgrades that you would see in other games, such as raw critical attack, attack speed up, attack up, etc. There is one exception, which is HP up. Some games lock extremely important things such as dodge rolling behind meta progression. Instead, EE's system enhances what you really already do in the game. For example, there's meta progression that gives you bonus money for clearing a room while you have high entropy. There's some where you start a run with bonus experience or bonus cash that lets you get to that roguelike drafting sooner rather than later. The version I played of the game had around 90% of the meta unlocked. I can't really gauge how long it takes to unlock the important stuff. The currency you need for these is called AP. This AP not only comes from normal runs, but the challenges I was talking about earlier also grant you AP. If there was ever a need to grind for currency, I think the challenge system is probably the most entertaining way to do this. You're not really spamming individual runs. Instead, you're taking that record into challenges and obtaining currency every time you win. Now, my personal thoughts on Blazblue Entropy Effect. If I were to make a roguelite game, I think it would be something very similar to Blazblue Entropy Effect. Over the years, we've played games that involve picking up an item or a weapon, and that weapon dictates how your character is played for the rest of the game. Here, I love the fact that your specific character evolves throughout the game, and I can really flex out my proficiency with that character through its potential. What I mean by that is if I'm a real fan of playing Mai, I can play Mai multiple different ways. And if I don't see the potential that I want it to, I at least have my own character prowess to carry me through with potentials that I really didn't expect to see. Combined with the sheer flashiness of this game, I'm already hooked in. If you can't tell what's going on in this fight, that might be okay as a new player. I think the goal would be to learn over time what's happening during all this chaos. Personally, I prefer my gameplay to be somewhat wild, so long as I don't feel lost in the combat. That being said, compared to other roguelikes I play, EE is often zoomed out a bit further than I would like to see. I understand that in this controlled chaos, vision of the battlefield is extremely important, but with such beautiful art and iconic characters from the BB universe, I'd love to see more of the art more often, whenever possible. I'm confident that the dev team can find a sweet spot between showcasing their great character art while also providing enough battle info on the screen so that you can play properly. Truthfully speaking, if I look at the top action roguelike games on Steam right now, many of them are a few years old. While they're all fantastic in their own right, I'm very much ready for another game that can prove it can stand among the ranks of all these giants. And trust me, I've played many of these, and you can see them all on my YouTube channel. Other than that, thanks for listening to me ramble on for this game. If you made it this far, leave the video a like, subscribe, and ring the bell so that way you're notified when the next videos drop. Either way, I'll see you next time.